in a world where authority often goes unchecked, and those who stand for what's right are met with fierce resistance. A single moment of bravery can ignite a movement. This is a story about standing up to power, challenging the status quo, and fighting for justice. Welcome to a gripping tale of resilience and accountability, a story where the clash between right and wrong unfolds in the most unexpected way. Don't just watch. Join us as we navigate this journey together. Lincoln Park, a bustling oasis in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, was alive with the sounds of children playing and families enjoying the warm spring afternoon. Among the crowd was a group of teenagers playing basketball on a worn-down court. Their laughter echoed, mixing with the rhythmic squeak of sneakers on pavement. Watching from the sidelines was Officer Darren Cole, known for his towering stature and an equally imposing reputation. Darren's icy glare swept over the park like a hawk looking for its next prey. On a nearby bench, Maya James, an FBI agent with a quiet yet commanding presence, sipped a cold lemonade while chatting with a friend. Dressed in casual clothes, her badge was tucked away, blending her seamlessly into the crowd. Maya valued her anonymity, using it to observe and connect with the community she had sworn to protect. As the afternoon wore on, a commotion broke out near the food stand. A young black girl, 15-year-old Kiara Johnson, accidentally bumped into Officer Cole while balancing a tray of snacks. The collision sent a soda can tumbling to the ground, landing right at Darren's polished boots. "Watch where you're going," Darren's voice boomed, silencing the nearby chatter. I'm sorry, sir," Kiara stammered, bending down to pick up the can. Her hands trembled as she avoided his piercing glare. "Sorry doesn't cut it," Darren growled, his voice dripping with condescension. "You kids think this place is a free-for-all. Show me some id." "I don't have it with me," Kiara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Figures," Darren muttered, his tone turning venomous. "Reckless and irresponsible. You need to learn some respect." Without warning, Darren shoved Kiara, causing her to stumble backward. A gasp rippled through the crowd as people turned their attention to the escalating scene. Phones were pulled out, cameras began recording, and the air grew thick with tension. From her bench, Maya noticed the commotion. Her eyes narrowed as she saw Kiara trying to steady herself while Darren loomed over her, his hand already reaching for his baton. Setting her drink aside, Maya rose to her feet and approached the officer. "That's enough," Maya said, her voice calm but firm as she stepped between Darren and Kiara. Her steady gaze met Darren's fiery glare. "This doesn't concern you," Darren snapped, his tone dripping with authority. "It does when you're assaulting a child," Maya replied evenly. "Back off." The crowd murmured in support, emboldened by Maya's fearless stance. Darren's jaw tightened as he took a step toward her, his temper bubbling to the surface. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" Darren hissed, leaning closer. Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her jacket and pulled out her FBI badge, holding it up for the crowd and Darren to see. "I know exactly who I'm talking to. Do you?" The murmurs of the crowd turned into audible gasps. Phones zoomed in on the badge, and the collective mood shifted. Darren froze momentarily, taken aback, but quickly recovered with a sneer. "You have no jurisdiction here," he spat, his voice rising. "Step away before you make things worse for yourself. Worse than assaulting a minor in front of witnesses and cameras." Maya shot back, her voice unwavering. She glanced at Kiara, who was still trembling, and then back at Darren. "You're out of line." Darren's face darkened as the crowd pressed closer, their phones capturing every word and movement. His fist clenched at his side, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though he might back down. But the anger bubbling beneath his composed exterior refused to be quelled. In a swift motion, Darren swung his arm toward Maya, aiming to shove her aside. But Maya, quick and trained, sidestepped the attack and firmly grasped his wrist. With a practiced maneuver, she twisted his arm and pushed him backward, forcing him off balance. The crowd erupted into cheers and shouts as Darren stumbled, his pride more bruised than his body. The cameras kept rolling, and the whispers of, "Did you see that?" spread through the park like wildfire. "Let this be your warning," Maya said, her voice low enough for only Darren to hear. "You're not above the law." The sound of sirens pierced the air as backup arrived, the blue and red lights reflecting off the crowd's eager faces. Darren's colleagues spilled out of their vehicles, their eyes darting between him, Maya, and the onlookers. "You assaulted an officer," Darren barked, clutching his radio. "Cuff her." Maya raised her hands, her badge still visible. "I'm not resisting. Check the footage. The truth is right there." As the officers hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, the crowd's chants grew louder. The lines had been drawn, and the scene at Lincoln Park was only the beginning of a battle for accountability and justice. The crowd at Lincoln Park buzzed with tension as Maya stood firm, her hands raised and her badge still visible. Officer Darren Cole's face flushed with frustration as he barked orders into his radio, demanding immediate backup. His colleagues, who had arrived moments earlier, hesitated, their eyes darted between Darren, Maya, and the crowd, who had their phones trained on every movement. One of the officers, a younger man named Officer Ramirez, stepped forward, his gaze shifting nervously between Maya and Darren. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She assaulted me," Darren growled, pointing an accusing finger at Maya. "Cuff her now." Maya held her ground, her tone calm and deliberate. "I'm Agent Maya James, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This officer shoved a minor and assaulted me when I intervened. Everything's been recorded." The crowd erupted in agreement, shouting, "Check the footage," and "We saw it all." The growing wave of voices drowned out Darren's protests. Ramirez hesitated, his brow furrowing as he glanced at Darren's still flushed face. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Darren snarled, his voice low enough for only Maya to hear. "You've made a huge mistake." "Maybe," Maya replied evenly, "but I'd rather make a mistake standing up for what's right than stay silent while you abuse your power." The tension peaked as more officers arrived, forming a perimeter around the park. Their presence only agitated the crowd, whose shouts of support for Maya grew louder. Social media platforms were already buzzing with live streams from multiple angles. Hashtags like #Justice for Kiara and #Accountability now trending within minutes. Darren, realizing the tide was turning against him, adjusted his approach. "She's resisting arrest," he announced loudly, his voice straining to drown out the murmurs. "Take her in." Before anyone could react, Maya raised her hands higher and stepped forward. "I'm not resisting," she said firmly, "but you need to think carefully about what you're doing. The truth is out there, and these cameras don't lie." Ramirez looked at Maya, then at Darren, his internal conflict evident. The younger officer finally turned to one of the bystanders and asked, "Do you have footage of what happened?" A woman in the crowd nodded, holding up her phone. "It's all here," she said. "He started it." Darren's jaw clenched as his colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. His once unshakable authority seemed to waver under the weight of public scrutiny. "Still," he barked, "arrest her, now." The officers moved toward Maya, but the crowd surged closer, their voices rising in protest. "No justice, no peace," someone shouted, and the chant quickly spread. The atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second, and for a moment, it seemed as though chaos might break out. Maya, sensing the danger, spoke loudly to the crowd. "Let them do their job," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "Stay peaceful. Let the truth come to light." Her words diffused some of the tension, and the crowd quieted slightly, though their phones remained pointed at the unfolding scene. Two officers cautiously approached Maya, one of them muttering, "Hands behind your back." Maya complied, her movements deliberate and measured. The metal of the handcuffs felt cold against her wrists, but her expression remained calm. As the officers led her toward a waiting patrol car, the crowd erupted again, this time chanting her name. "Justice for Maya, justice for Kiara." Kiara, standing near the front of the crowd, clutched her phone tightly. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "I'm sorry." Maya turned to her with a soft, reassuring smile. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "Keep filming. Let them see the truth." As the car door closed behind her, Maya glanced out at the sea of faces. Their determination and anger were palpable. This wasn't just her fight, it was a stand against years of unchecked abuse and systemic injustice. She took a deep breath, knowing the battle was far from over. Meanwhile, Darren stood on the edge of the park, his radio clutched tightly in his hand. Despite his outward bravado, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face as he noticed his colleagues whispering among themselves. One officer, a middle-aged woman named Sergeant Blake, approached him with a grim expression. "Cole, this doesn't look good," she said quietly. "The footage is everywhere. The department's going to have questions." Darren scoffed, brushing her off. "I don't care about the footage. She disrespected me, and she's going to pay for it." Blake's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You'd better hope you're right. Because if you're not, this could cost more than just your badge." The weight of her words lingered as Darren turned away, his fists clenching in frustration. The world was watching now, and the story was no longer his to control. As Maya sat in the back of the patrol car, the sound of sirens blaring around her, she closed her eyes and thought about her next move. This was no longer about her, or even about Kiara. This was about holding those in power accountable, about changing a system that allowed injustice to thrive. And as long as she had breath in her body, she wasn't going to back down. Inside the cramped holding cell of Atlanta's central precinct, Maya sat quietly, her mind racing. The cold steel bench beneath her was uncomfortable, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the moment. She knew she was at the center of a firestorm, one that was rapidly spreading beyond the walls of the precinct. The buzz of voices outside the holding area hinted at the chaos unfolding beyond. Reporters, activists, and concerned citizens demanding answers. Maya glanced at her reflection in the one-way glass opposite her. Her calm exterior belied the churn of emotions within. She replayed the incident at Lincoln Park in her mind, analyzing every decision she had made. She didn't regret standing up for Kiara, but the consequences of her actions loomed large. The system wasn't kind to whistleblowers, even those within its ranks. Outside the precinct, the scene was pandemonium. Protesters had gathered in droves, their signs held high, demanding justice for Maya and Kiara. Chants of accountability now, and justice for all, echoed off the precinct walls. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward as reporters delivered live updates to a captivated audience. Social media was ablaze with footage of the confrontation, each clip dissected and shared millions of times. At the heart of the crowd was Kiara, her small frame almost swallowed by the throng of protesters. She clutched a sign that read, "Protect our children, not your ego." Despite her fear, she stood tall, bolstered by the support of strangers who had rallied to her and Maya's cause. Back inside the precinct, Sergeant Blake entered the holding area, her expression unreadable. She unlocked the door to Maya's cell and stepped inside, her hands clasped in front of her. "Maya James," Blake began, her voice low but firm. "You've caused quite a stir." Maya met her gaze evenly. "I stood up for what was right. If that causes a stir, so be it." Blake sighed, pulling out a tablet and swiping through the stream of viral footage. "This isn't just a stir. It's a storm. The brass upstairs is getting calls from everyone, city officials, the FBI, even the mayor's office. People want answers, and they're not going to let this go quietly." "Good," Maya replied. "They shouldn't." Blake studied her for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "Off the record, I think you did the right thing. But this isn't going to be easy. Darren Cole's got friends in high places, and they'll do everything they can to bury this." Maya leaned forward, her voice resolute. "Then they'll have to bury me too. Because I'm not backing down." Blake nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I figured you'd say that." Elsewhere in the precinct, Darren paced in a conference room, his phone pressed to his ear. His tone was sharp, his frustration boiling over. "This is getting out of control," he hissed. "I need you to get ahead of this, issue a statement. Discredit her, whatever it takes. I'm not losing my career over some hot-headed agent." On the other end of the line, a smooth voice replied, "Careful, Darren, this isn't just a PR problem. It's a legal one. That footage doesn't look good. And you've already got a record of complaints. My advice, lay low and let us handle it." Darren slammed the phone onto the table, his anger barely contained. His usual confidence was unraveling as the reality of the situation set in. The world was watching, and for the first time, he was on the wrong side of public opinion. Hours later, Maya was released from the holding cell under the condition that she stay available for questioning. As she stepped out of the precinct, the roar of the crowd greeted her like a wave. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in her direction, and a chorus of voices called her name. Kiara broke through the throng, her tearful eyes locking onto Maya. "You're free," she cried, throwing her arms around the agent. Maya returned the hug, her composure softening. "I'm free, for now," she said, glancing at the sea of supporters. "But this fight is just beginning." A reporter pushed through the crowd, shoving a microphone toward Maya. "Agent James, do you have any comment on the viral footage? What's your response to Officer Cole's allegations?" Maya paused, the weight of the moment settling over her. She turned to the cameras, her voice clear and unwavering. The truth is out there for everyone to see. I acted to protect a child from harm. And I'd do it again. No one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. Her words sent a ripple through the crowd, their cheers erupting in a thunderous wave. The movement had grown far beyond Lincoln Park. It was now a citywide reckoning. Later that night, Maya sat in her modest apartment, scrolling through the endless stream of messages on her phone. Some were supportive, others hateful. She expected the backlash but was heartened by the overwhelming support from strangers who believed in her cause. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Kiara standing there with her mother, a resolute woman who introduced herself as Angela Johnson. "I wanted to thank you," Angela said, her voice trembling slightly, "for standing up for Kiara. For standing up for all of us." Maya nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "This isn't over," she said, "but together, we'll make sure they can't ignore us." As they sat together, strategizing and sharing stories, the seeds of a movement began to take root. What started as a single act of courage was growing into something much larger, something that would challenge not just Darren Cole, but the entire system he represented. The morning after her release, Maya woke to a world transformed. What began as a confrontation in Lincoln Park had snowballed into a nationwide conversation about accountability, abuse of power, and the courage it takes to challenge authority. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags like #JusticeForKiara, #StandWithMaya, and #AccountabilityNow. Major news outlets had picked up the story, and talk shows buzzed with debates about the implications of Maya's actions. As Maya prepared for the day, her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages. Friends, colleagues, and strangers alike reached out to express their support, or to warn her of the backlash. Despite the overwhelming attention, Maya stayed focused. She knew the fight wasn't just about her. It was about a system that had failed too many for too long. At City Hall, a press conference was called to address the growing unrest. Mayor Evelyn Carter, a sharp and pragmatic leader, stood before a sea of reporters. Her tailored navy suit and composed demeanor projected authority. But the tension in the room was palpable. "We take the allegations against Officer Darren Cole very seriously," she began, her voice steady, effective immediately. "He has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We are committed to transparency and ensuring justice is served." The announcement was met with murmurs from the press. While some saw it as a step in the right direction, others dismissed it as political damage control. Outside, protesters gathered, their signs and chants a reflection of their frustration. At the center of the crowd stood Kiara and her mother, Angela, who had become vocal advocates overnight. Kiara's once timid demeanor had been replaced with a quiet confidence, her voice growing stronger with every interview she gave. Meanwhile, inside the FBI's Atlanta field office, Maya was called into a private meeting with Assistant Director Robert Wallace, a seasoned agent known for his no-nonsense approach. As she stepped into his office, she was met with a steely gaze that betrayed no emotion. "Maya," Wallace began, gesturing for her to sit. "You've stirred up quite the hornet's nest." "I didn't intend to," Maya replied evenly, "but I won't apologize for doing the right thing." Wallace leaned back in his chair, studying her. "The Bureau doesn't operate in a vacuum. Public perception matters. And this situation has put us in a difficult position. Difficult for who? Maya challenged. For the Bureau, or for those who think they're untouchable? A flicker of a smile crossed Wallace's face. But it was gone as quickly as it came. You're a damn good agent, Maya. That's why I'm going to say this once. Be careful. This isn't just about one officer. The system doesn't like being challenged. And there are people who will stop at nothing to discredit you. Maya nodded, her resolve unwavering. Let them try. The truth is on my side. Elsewhere in Atlanta, Darren Cole was holed up in his suburban home. Blinds drawn and phone off. The once confident officer was now a man on the defensive. His every action scrutinized by the public. News outlets replayed the footage from Lincoln Park on a loop, dissecting every moment of his confrontation with Maya. Darren's frustration boiled over as he paced his living room. They're making me the villain, he muttered to himself. This isn't fair. But deep down, he knew the footage didn't lie. His years of unchecked behavior had finally caught up with him. And the walls were closing in. At a community center downtown, Maya, Kiara, and Angela joined a growing coalition of activists, lawyers, and community leaders. The room buzzed with energy as they strategized ways to channel the public outrage into tangible change. We need to push for policy reforms, said Elena Rodriguez, a prominent civil rights attorney. Body cameras, independent oversight, and stronger accountability measures. This is our chance to make real progress. Kiara spoke up, her voice steady despite the nerves she still felt. We also need to focus on education. If I hadn't been there with my phone, who knows what would have happened? People need to know their rights. The room erupted in applause. And Maya felt a swell of pride. This was why she had acted, not just to stand up to Darren, but to empower others to do the same. As the day turned to night, protests continued across the city. Outside the precinct, a vigil was held for victims of police misconduct. With candles and photos lining the steps, Maya stood among the crowd, her heart heavy as she listened to story after story of lives lost or destroyed by abuse of power. Angela placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. You've inspired so many, she said softly, but don't forget to take care of yourself, too. This fight isn't over, and we need you strong. Maya nodded, grateful for the reminder. The weight of the movement was immense. But she knew she wasn't alone. In the quiet moments of the night, Maya returned to her apartment and opened her laptop. Emails and messages poured in from across the country, support from activists, offers from legal organizations, and even messages of hope from ordinary citizens who had been moved by her story. One email stood out. It was from a young woman in Texas who wrote, "Because of you, I finally have the courage to speak out about what happened to me. Thank you for being brave enough to lead the way." Maya closed the laptop and sat in silence for a moment, letting the words sink in. This fight was bigger than her, bigger than Atlanta. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been silenced, ignored, or dismissed. She looked out the window at the city lights and whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." The sun rose over Atlanta, casting a golden glow across the city as the tension in the air remained palpable. The events at Lincoln Park had become a rallying cry, sparking protests in cities across the nation. The fight for justice was no longer just about Maya or Kiara. It had become a symbol of resistance against systemic abuse and the demand for accountability. Maya's day began early as she arrived at the courthouse. A hearing had been scheduled to address the charges filed against her by Darren Cole, who claimed she had assaulted him and obstructed police duties. The courtroom was packed with supporters, reporters, and activists, the energy electric with anticipation. In the courtroom, Maya sat next to her attorney, Elena Rodriguez, who had become a staunch ally in the fight. Darren Cole sat across from them, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. The presiding judge, an older man with a calm but commanding presence, called the court to order. "Elena, are you ready for this?" Maya asked quietly. Elena nodded, her confidence unwavering. "We've got the truth on our side. That's all we need." The prosecution presented its case first, replaying edited clips of the incident that painted Darren as a victim. They argued that Maya's intervention had escalated the situation and endangered public safety. But when it was Elena's turn, she systematically dismantled their arguments. She played the full, unedited footage from the bystanders' phones, showing Darren's aggression toward Kiara and his unprovoked attack on Maya. The courtroom fell silent as the images spoke for themselves. Agent Maya James didn't obstruct justice, Elena declared. She upheld it. "What we see here is an abuse of power. Plain and simple. And it's not an isolated incident, it's a pattern." Elena then introduced witnesses, including Kiara, who testified with a newfound strength in her voice. "She saved me," Kiara said, looking directly at Maya. "She stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself." When Darren was called to the stand, his demeanor was defensive and combative. Under cross-examination, Elena skillfully highlighted inconsistencies in his testimony, revealing the cracks in his story. The judge adjourned for deliberation, leaving the room buzzing with speculation. Outside the courthouse, a massive crowd had gathered, awaiting the verdict. As Maya and Elena stepped onto the courthouse steps, the crowd erupted into cheers. Maya raised a hand for silence, her voice carrying over the noise. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about all of us. It's about standing up when we see injustice and holding those in power accountable. No one is above the law." Her words ignited a renewed wave of chants and applause. Maya turned to see Kiara and Angela in the crowd, their faces glowing with pride. The verdict came quickly. The judge dismissed the charges against Maya, ruling that her actions had been justified. Furthermore, he called for an independent review of Darren's conduct and the department's handling of the case. The courtroom erupted in applause. But the victory was bittersweet. Darren's actions were symptomatic of a larger problem, and Maya knew the fight was far from over. Days later, Darren Cole's disciplinary hearing concluded with a recommendation to terminate his employment and strip him of his badge. The footage from Lincoln Park, coupled with the testimonies of those present, had left the department with little choice. Darren's smirk was gone as he left the building, his career in ruins. Maya, watching the news coverage, felt a mix of relief and resolve. It wasn't about Darren, it was about ensuring no one else suffered the same way Kiara almost had. The movement that had begun in Lincoln Park continued to grow. With Maya's leadership and the support of activists like Elena, Angela, and Kiara, local communities started pushing for policy changes. Town hall meetings, workshops, and rallies became common as people united around the cause of justice and accountability. Kiara, once shy and afraid, became a powerful voice in the movement. She spoke at events, sharing her story and encouraging others to stand up for what was right. Her courage inspired a new generation of activists, determined to ensure their voices were heard. Months later, Maya returned to Lincoln Park for the first time since the incident. The park had become a symbol of change, and a small plaque had been installed near the basketball court. It read, "In honor of those who stand for justice, even in the face of adversity. May we all strive to create a world where every voice is heard and every life valued." As Maya read the inscription, Kiara approached her with a wide smile. "They asked me to help design it," she said proudly. "It's perfect," Maya replied, her voice filled with emotion. She looked around at the park, now bustling with life again, and felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in months. "This is just the beginning," Maya said, placing a hand on Kiara's shoulder. "There's so much more to do." Kiara nodded. "But we'll do it together." The story of Lincoln Park had become more than just a moment. It had sparked a movement that swept across the country, challenging systems, inspiring action, and proving that one voice, joined by many, could indeed bring about change. As the sun set over Atlanta, Maya walked away from the park with a renewed sense of purpose. Justice, she knew, wasn't just a destination, it was a journey. And it was one she was ready to continue, step by step, for as long as it took. The story of Maya James and Kiara Johnson is more than a tale of courage. It's a testament to the power of standing up against injustice. In a world that often seems divided, moments like these remind us of the shared values that unite us: fairness, accountability, and the unwavering belief that every voice matters. This isn't just about one park in Atlanta or one office's actions. It's about the systems we uphold and the choices we make every day. It's about the courage to intervene when we see wrong, the strength to speak out when it's easier to stay silent, and the resilience to demand a better world. To everyone watching, let this story serve as a reminder: justice begins with us. Whether you're in the United States, Europe, or anywhere around the globe, the principles of equality and integrity transcend borders. Together, we can build a world where kindness, fairness, and respect are not exceptions but the rule. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. True courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. Your voice has power. Use it to uplift others and challenge injustice. Seek understanding, not division. We live in a time where differences are often amplified. But empathy and open dialogue can break down barriers and bring people together. Accountability starts at every level, from individual actions to systemic changes. We all play a role in shaping the societies we live in. Be a force for good, no matter where you are. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you the most powerful and thought-provoking stories from around the world, for free. Click that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Together, we can share stories that inspire hope, spark conversations, and drive change. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind, stay strong, and stay united.